Hey everyone, greetings. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout and Outspoken, and I'm in Washington, D.C., in a very tiny hotel room. And I want to talk about three things. It's a kind of a week roundup, sort of podcast. And we're going to talk about a young woman who is suing UConn. I'm sorry, she's suing schools in Connecticut because she graduated and was accepted to the University of Connecticut while she was still illiterate. That's, I think, a really important story. We're going to talk about the SAVE Act, which could actually save the country. And we're going to talk about Marco Rubio's, Secretary of State's, incredible, historic, momentous, powerful speech at the Munich Security Conference, in which he kind of laid out a rationale for President Trump's foreign policy and really called Europe to account for being suicidal, essentially civilizationally suicidal, and laid out a call for Europe to cherish its own civilization, its own language, its own history, its own religions, and kind of a forceful rejection of globalism, mass migration from countries that don't share Europe's values and the Anglo-American alliance's values, the European-American alliance's values. We're going to talk about all of those things. But before we do, I just want to talk a little bit about what it feels like to be in DC, a little bit of a verbal journal here. It's very haunting right now being in Washington, DC. I had the honor, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this, so I'll just say until I get the okay to talk about it, that I was shown a beautiful historic location last night that's part of our nation's heritage. And I was very moved to feel those layers of good ghosts, those layers of the spirits of so many generations of leaders trying to keep this incredible country and its incredible mission alive through all kinds of crises, from the War of 1812 to the Civil War, World War II, so on. That was very, very profound. But at the same time, I'm in, my hotel was like 2 blocks from the White House, and I walked near the White House. And you remember I was a sort of a wife of a speechwriter, a White House spouse in the Clinton era. And then I helped the Clintons, gain their reelection. Then I helped Al Gore. I didn't help the Clintons directly. I helped the campaign. And then I helped Vice President Gore directly and with his campaign. So I know the White House quite well. And I know that area well. As a White House spouse, I remember sitting with my toddler right on the street opposite and eating a snack and sharing it with her. And she was about 1. And for the first time, she had a conversation with me. It was our first conversation, sitting side by side on the curb by Lafayette Park, eating a snack of some kind. I'll never forget it. And for the first time, I thought, this isn't just a baby. This is a person that I can talk to. How extraordinary. And I remember, as a White House spouse, walking into, getting, of course, screened and vetted and cleared to go into the old executive office building, the beautiful, I think, 1860s, 1870s building, crenellations, turrets, right next to the White House. It's not as storied, but it's just as important, right? Because that's where the work is done. And I mean, that's where a lot of the work is done. And going in there for cocktail parties, or going in there to bring lunch to my, then husband, who was a White House speechwriter, walking down those long historic corridors with their black and white marble checkerboard patterns, very, the high ceilings, very profound feeling of the continuity of this country's ideals. And all these people, not just the president and his advisors in the cabinet, but in the OEOB, the old executive office building, all these kind of functionaries, lower level people on the totem pole who keep everything going, who write the speeches, who draft the policy papers, who do the scheduling, who keep the whole machine of the pinnacle of state moving forward. So it was very, very nostalgic for me to see those buildings, but also quite a shock, because right now the street in front of the White House is completely blocked off. All of Lafayette Square is completely blocked off. The streets on the other side of the White House are completely blocked off, like barricades. And there's also ringing the White House toward Lafayette Square, there are concrete barriers to prevent like suicide bombers from driving into the White House, essentially. None of that existed when I was an advisor, or before that, when I was a White House spouse in the 90s. They didn't exist. These things didn't exist. It got worse and worse over the course of the last 26 years, but you could still, walk past the White House and look at a beautiful fence, and through a beautiful wrought iron fence that wasn't that high, that enveloped the White House. You could still walk through the streets on the other side of the White House and admire it, from every angle, admire it from multiple vistas. You could still walk up the steps of the old executive office building, these vast magisterial steps that were part of the impressive architecture facing the street that faces Lafayette Park. In other words, the White House were part of the architecture of civil society. When I was a young woman, you could walk up the Capitol, you could walk into the Capitol, right? You're considered an insurrectionary now if you walk inside the Capitol building. And there are snipers now on the steps of the Capitol building. In the 1930s, people protested by sitting on the steps of the Capitol building and lobbying their representatives. This is the bonus army, it was called. Could be earlier than the 30s, but these were World War I veterans who hadn't gotten their bonus, and it was now a depression, and they would just sit there and talk to the lawmakers walking up and down the steps. That's how informal our democracy has been. Andrew Jackson invited a bunch of people into the White House, like ordinary people, not elites. It was rather scandalous at the time, but that was our brand, that was our mission, that the pinnacle of leadership was of a piece with the people. The people were running the country, the people were in charge, even though it wasn't always perfect, even though Blacks were enslaved and women were disenfranchised and Black people were disenfranchised, and then there was the civil rights movement because of Jim Crow, like not perfect, but always with that beautiful ideal of the people run this country. I felt like the Trump administration and these extraordinary people I know in the Trump administration are still keeping that ship sailing. And they're doing heroic work, I think with God's hand assisting them, trying to clean up the deep state, trying to get election integrity, trying to close our borders, trying to get millions of people who are not even Americans out of America, right? The number one job of a nation, to have sovereign borders and only citizens making decisions about what happens in the country. But that felt like a little campfire of idealism surrounded by absolute barbarism. And surrounded by threats and surrounded by danger. That's what it felt like. And I want us to get our safe, idealistic civil society back. I want the day to come when we can take down the concrete barricades around the White House because we're safe again, because the president is secure again, because no one's trying to assassinate the president. Same thing with the Supreme Court. I'm going close to the Supreme Court later today. And the last time I was in that area, the Supreme Court, where you could literally protest right up to the Supreme Court, right? And you could walk in and take tours in my lifetime. Well, you can't get anywhere near the Supreme Court now. It's, if anything, even more heavily barricaded than certainly than the old executive office building. And that's heartbreaking because the Supreme Court is supposed to represent people, who happen to be judges, sitting and adjudicating the laws passed by people who are sitting in Congress, sitting in the Capitol, who are also supposed to just be representing us, we the people. So it all felt very Stalinist. It all felt very totalitarian, like we were in the middle of East Germany. I just really want to stress it was the architecture of the threats against the administration, the reaction of the deep state being dismantled. I felt that caused the Stalinist vibe and probably the need for all this security. But you feel that there's a war. You feel that this administration is trying just to pick up the mantle of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Martin Luther King Jr. But that deep special interests are opposing him, and that it used to be done really in my lifetime, kind of under the surface, very politely. But now the fact that it's war is getting very obvious to everyone. And you can feel that as you move around the city. Some other really interesting moments. I was in a cab, and the cab driver, who's an immigrant, but there are, wonderful immigrant communities in DC, of course, who keep the city going in various ways. Excuse me. He was very upset because so many federal employees have been let go. And you could definitely feel that as well. You could feel the absence of tens of thousands of people since the mass layoffs of early in the first year of the first term of this president, second term of this president. In other words, 2025. DC used to be a lot more crowded with federal workers. And the other thing you used to be able to feel was federal and lobbyists' money flowing, especially lobbyists' money, flowing through restaurants and nightclubs and bars in Washington, D.C. Just flowing and flowing and flowing and flowing. It was a city of the flow of money. And this, of course, enriched restaurateurs and bartenders and waitresses and waiters and specialty food shops and so on. But that's gone. Like there's still obviously nice restaurants in DC. There are still nice bars, but it feels like a third of the hospitality industry that there used to be. And it's also like unbelievably cheap to stay here. I mean, I think this hotel was like $129 a night, and it's a 4-star hotel. So not that I'm a diva, I just like $129 a night. But it was very striking to me that this taxi driver was so angry. He said, what about people with mortgages? What about people with children in school? And then I felt myself becoming kind of angry. I mean, I try not to fight with cab drivers or even people I don't agree with politically, but I felt deeply angry, maybe especially because I didn't know, his status in this country, which maybe that's really objectionable of me, but I'm just being honest about how I felt. But I felt really angry that he had an opinion about what Americans' tax dollars should be doing. And, obviously he was annoyed about the slashing of federal employees' employment, because as a cab driver, it's harder for him to make the same money now that he used to, and he was saying, and he made good points. What about all those waiters and waitresses? What about all those restaurant owners? Is it good for them that the money that these employees used to have isn't circulating in the economy? And I found myself getting quite irate. I was nice, but my position was no one should have any expectations about what is done with American tax dollars. Those people didn't have a lifelong tenure or sinecure to have a job paid by taxpayers. The government seems to be running okay, even with all those jobs slashed. I mean, you may notice, things are still getting processed. You can still get your your license, your driver's license, you can still get your taxes processed. I mean, the federal government doesn't do so much that we experience in our daily lives that I think most people are noticing a negative impact from all those firings, which really makes you think, like, what were these people doing? What was this machine, this gigantic machine that President Trump and Doge was able to slash, and it's still functioning pretty well, or at least not noticeably worse than it did, right? And I also felt like, how can I put it? Like there was no awareness and no reaction. I've seen this before, especially on the left. I don't know if he was on the left, but he was definitely, not, he was opposed to what Trump and Doge had done. But when I said, we're $1 trillion in debt and we're going to go broke if we don't rein in our spending, it was like this. And I've seen that before. And I used to be part of that community, like no reaction to that. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not real. Just print more money. What are you talking about? Or you're so mean, austerity is so mean. But it just really struck me that, and I've seen this before, like America it's being treated as the endless cornucopia, the ever-giving mother that is never going to draw a boundary, never say enough, never turn anyone away. And I was so tired of it, and I actually said, I hope I don't sound like a heartless, mean girl, but I honestly said something like, the people who are laid off are educated, skilled people. If they can't pay their mortgage in Washington, D.C., they can sell their house and get a mortgage somewhere else and get a job somewhere else. Like nothing, if they need to move their kids, I'm sorry, but they need to move their kids. These are not people without skills. These are people with skills. And who said it was forever? Who said government work is a lifelong golden ticket which pays your mortgage for the rest of your life and then your retirement? I just found myself so angry at the entitlement that all these people obviously sitting in that cab have expressed. Oh, how dare President Trump take away my ability to pay my mortgage? It's our tax dollars, and I said to him, when you pay taxes, you're paying like a third of your income, to keep this running. Doesn't that bother you? I didn't really get a response there. So that is tragic. And it was striking to me. And I think it's part of why I feel a little bit sad today, just walking around DC. DC is clearly in a massive restructuring, massive upheaval. You can feel the machine of the Democrats and the machine of the deep state weakened. Like this is all energetic. I'm from California. I have no hardcore evidence, but that whole like pumping, vibrant machine of, lobbyists and deep state and Democrats, entrenched, like, the teachers union and the trial lawyers and, NARAL and all the big money on the left, it feels scattered. And even the sense of mission on the left, like in the past, you would come to DC and you'd feel like, oh, here are the Republican values and here are the Democratic values. It's about the little guy. It's about unions. It's about saving Social Security. You can't feel that anymore. At least I can't, and Democrats used to have a real mission that they could articulate that was sympathetic. I don't anywhere feel or see that that's happening. I feel like they've lost their raison d'être. They've lost their ability to explain to ordinary people who are not a foreign country subsidizing them or Pritzkers, what they're for, right? It's boiled down to such a weird set of policies that don't have a lot of political capital, like, boys and girls sports. That who called for that? No one's going to vote on the basis of that, except to lose votes, which is what Democrats are seeing, or, open borders. Americans from every walk of life see the value of closing borders. Polls show that. Not showing ID, this incredible all points, bulletin for Democrats to get behind how tyrannical and fascistic it is to ask someone to show that they're a member of the United States of America, a citizen of the United States of America, when they register to vote. It makes the Democrats look like a cult, honestly, completely out of touch with reality, and like cheaters. It's again very hard to get behind, and the way they've been trying to articulate, why this is important and why it's fascistic of Republicans to ask for citizenship upon registering to vote. They're trotting out. Everyone got sick of the racism of Black people can't figure out how to get an ID. So now they've moved on to rural and married women can't figure out how to get an ID. The SAVE Act is going to disenfranchise 70 million women who've changed their names. And of course, all these women who've changed their names on social media are, saying, I have my documents here. I have my documents here. I know perfectly well how to update my document. I know how to get my birth certificate. It's not flying well for them. So that's another aspect of feeling like, this is a giant mountain of corruption that's kind of falling apart because President Trump and his administration are dismantling it. This sense that Democrats can't win unless they're going to cheat. And we'll dive more into that. So let's thank you for letting me share what was on my mind with that. Let me get to our first story, which is a heartbreaking story, but it's also an infuriating story. There is a Hartford, Connecticut high school graduate, Alicia Ortiz, and there's a picture of her receiving her diploma. She graduated from Hartford High School, and the Connecticut Mirror reported a few weeks ago that this young woman graduated from Hartford Public High School without being able to read or write or do more than rudimentary addition, and was then somehow admitted to the University of Connecticut, which is a prestigious private school. There's no investigation of the girl's case from the State Education Department or the General Assembly, and those are the entities that fund and finance most of Hartford's school system. And so Torres Rodriguez told the Hartford Courant, that's the principal, that the school system is deeply concerned about the case and will examine its, quote, entire chronology and address any mistakes. Quote, we have an expectation that if anyone sees something of concern, you say something, end quote, the superintendent said. The teachers union, the Hartford Teachers Union leader, Carol Gale, says the girl's failure to learn wasn't the fault of union members. Quote, teachers advocated for the student all along her journey, end quote, Gale says. According to Gale, the problem is, you guessed it, a lack of money. So employees in Hartford schools receive over $150,000 annually in salary and benefits. And this commentator makes the case, which is the first thing that comes to my mind, could no one have noticed by even 7th or 8th grade that this girl couldn't read and write and then do something about it? So an investigation is unlikely to reveal all the staff members who had contact with this girl throughout her years in school. It's not going to reveal what they did or didn't do about her illiteracy. It's not going to hold anyone to account, this commentator points out. But this is, something we've really got to wrap our brains around. The state has no proficiency testing to determine advancement from grade to grade and graduation. I'm going to say that again. You think school is what it used to be when you went to public school. If you're 40 plus, you have to take a test or have certain grades in order to be promoted to the next year. That is no longer the case. And by the way, this is in state after state after state, overwhelmingly blue states. In New York, I've talked to teachers who describe it as a policy of meet students where they are. And it's also called social promotion. You may have heard of it. You may be dealing with it with your own kids in public schools, in which case, God bless you, right? It's going to be a struggle. Well, Connecticut did away with making sure students had mastered third grade before going on to fourth grade. I mean, when I was growing up, if kids didn't master, if they weren't proficient in third grade, they got held back a year and they had to do it over again. And that was something no one wanted to be faced with. Connecticut stopped doing that. That's why the state has no proficiency testing. So kids are just ushered from grade to grade to grade. So this has consequences. The Danbury News Times reported a few weeks ago that 70% of the city students in grade 3 through 8 are not performing at grade level. And this commentator points out that no one noticed outside the city. The writer points out that the same proficiency disaster is replicated almost everywhere and is being deliberately ignored. So he calls for ending the social promotion that guarantees educational failure. He's saying if that happened, it would empty the upper grades and stuff the lower ones with kids who have to become proficient. But 15 years, it's Chris Powell, who's written about Connecticut government and politics for many years. 15 years, students, there's been this trend to weaken what students need to know before they get promoted on to the next grade. And so this is what the result is. And it shouldn't be surprising, although I must be, I must be very old-fashioned and be so shocked. Of course, if you just socially promote kids from grade to grade to grade, someone's not going to be able to read or write or do more than elementary math. Now, I think it's very interesting that the student is suing the school system. I can see the rationale for that, but I also have to ask, where were her parents? And don't hate me. I know parents have all kinds of challenges, but I hope if your child couldn't read or write, you would notice by the time that child was 5 or 6. I don't know how a family can, let a girl not read or write 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, into high school, graduating from high school. The family's got to know that their daughter can't read or write. And if the school isn't going to teach your daughter to read or write, you have to teach your child to read and write. Yes, we can all sue the school system, but this situation is one I think everyone's culpable, right? Certainly the teachers are culpable, but if there's no reinforcement at home, like do your homework, read a book. Why aren't you reading a book? I don't see that, suing everyone in sight for lack of proficiency in the school system is doing any more than offloading a multifaceted failure. So I would say the failure began, I'm going to say it, don't get mad at me, don't call me racist, don't call me classist, don't call me elitist. I do think the failure began at home, right? Like if your child can't read, teach your child to read. Seriously. And if you work all day, I'm sorry, I've been there. If you work all day, you got to teach your child to read at night and on weekends. You have to. Or you have to camp out, in the school and say, don't move my child to 4th grade because she can't read at a 3rd grade level. There's more to be said about this case. We'll keep following it, but it makes me really, really, really sad. And it makes me sad that a young woman, it's embarrassing for her, or it should be embarrassing for her. It's embarrassing that UConn let her in without proficiency. What's that about? I mean, that's a question to put to the University of Connecticut admissions office. How could they not know she wasn't proficient? Maybe it's not clear in her transcripts. Maybe she kept getting B's and C's and they just needed whatever she brought, diversity, so much that they didn't care. But I can't believe you have to get like letters of recommendation in order to apply to a private school like UConn. I can't believe if she couldn't read and write, teachers at her high school wrote her letters of recommendation, praising her because she can't read or write or do more than basic math. So I think it's a really one of those flashpoint cases. We'll keep following it. I have lots of judgment, which maybe is very un-Buddhist of me, but I have lots of feelings about all the people who failed this young girl. I don't get mad at me. I also feel like if you're 17 years old and you're about to graduate from high school, I think you have a responsibility to say, hey, I can't read or write or do more than basic math. I do. And don't hate me. Don't hate me. There are so many apps now, or, Coursera, courses on YouTube. If you can't read or write and you're 15, 16, 17 years old, get on YouTube and learn to read and write. I'm sorry. Is that bad? Tell me in the comments if it's bad. You can't just coast and then sue the school system. That's my view. Yes, they have responsibility, but we all have responsibilities to make sure our kids are literate, including teenagers themselves have a responsibility to not be illiterate. I do think that, and I believe that. And there's so many resources. Let's see. Another middle-aged MAGA was arrested yesterday for assaulting high school protesters. 2 weeks ago it was Chad Michael Watt. This week it's Michael Brown. He was charged with child abuse. Wow. Were they anti-ICE high school protesters? That's really bad. It's really bad, but I also want to say it too is predictable. I think these stories are related. The movement, the wave of shocking to me, teachers taking students out of public school in order to engage in anti-ICE protests. It's wrong for many reasons. It's partisan, but it's also very dangerous. And when I was in public school, you couldn't just take kids out of school. You needed an individual permission slip for every single child. Do they have those? But predictably, if you're taking kids into a volatile, highly charged partisan situation, some are going to get hit by cars the way one of those poor young people got hit by a car. Some are going to rampage. We've seen the ICE protests of high school students turning into feral rampages, in which a teacher or a mom got attacked. And, some are going to get assaulted by adults because kids shouldn't be out of school, in any kind of situation that's not educational and that's not okayed by their parents. So I think it's deliberate. On social media these days, I'm writing the word memo when something seems to be recurring in order to bring about certain outcomes in society, like a collapse of the West. And it's completely predictable. If you bring kids and you encourage them to go nuts and scream and challenge law enforcement, what's that doing to the little, shock troops of the future? Then you bring them in contact with adults in dangerous situations. There is going to be chaos and havoc, and I think that's the intention of these anti-ICE protests. I think that if you follow the money far enough, and Brian O'Shea has done a lot of work on this, other people have too, you'll see that foreign powers that want to destabilize us are funding these kinds of moves, just like they're funding sexualizing kids in public school, just like they're funding in England, pro-Islamic experiences in public school and the erasure of Christian or other, Judeo-Christian experiences in public school, even though Britain is a Christian country. Today is Ash Wednesday, and I saw a story that a boy got sent home or told to wash his cross off his forehead. And you're seeing more and more of this anti-Christian, anti-Jewish discrimination in schools, and a weird double standard, which has torn apart the United Kingdom already, promoting Islamism. And that also is part of the memo. No offense to Muslims. I would like to hear more voices of moderate Muslims these days, but kids are definitely being weaponized and schools are being weaponized to create instability and division. Audrey W9U8H says, I have two daughters in their early 20s. We voted for the presidential candidate who was found guilty of felonies and was found liable for sexual abuse because of our values. That's a very provocative sentence. You can say more about that if you want. Let's see what this is. Jetta Smith says, several years ago, the state of Washington gave me my 4-year-old grandson to take care of for over a year. I got him a tutor. I did not trust the school system or his mother to teach him to read. So I paid a tutor to come to the house every week to work with him and teach him the proper way to read and to understand the English language. Oh, Ms. Smith, you are a saint and a hero. God bless you. You did the right thing. You did the right thing. And I know half the country is living paycheck to paycheck, and it's not easy to do that. But I'm sure it wasn't the most, the highest cost you've ever spent for anything, hiring the tutor, but it's probably the best investment you've ever made. So God bless you for taking care of your grandchild that way. Good for you. All right, we're going to go on to our next story, which is the SAVE Act. All right, so let me share this screen, which I'm so proud of figuring out how to do. And I do think this is related to what I was describing at the start of this podcast. President Trump has moved this bill out of the House, which is a big deal. So it's gone to the Senate. It's called the SAVE Act. It's supported by President Donald Trump. It passed the House last week. So the Senate's 60-vote filibuster rule is the only thing standing in the way of it becoming law. And this is NBC News. There's Susan Collins, who became the 50th Republican, a moderate Republican from Maine, to back the Save America Act. So it's a pretty straightforward bill that requires proof of citizenship nationwide to register to vote. You don't have to prove your citizenship at the polling place just in order to register to vote. And it overhauls voting laws. And it's a big deal. There's going to be a battle over the bill on the Senate floor. Majority Leader John Thune has promised a vote, but he warned last week that there are not even close to enough votes for getting rid of the filibuster. In other words, they don't have a filibuster-proof majority to pass it in the Senate. Mike Lee is the chief sponsor of the bill, and he's strategizing a talking filibuster, which has been used before, but it's definitely a tricky way to get a bill passed. Senator Susan Collins, the centrist from Maine, who faces a competitive reelection bid this fall, becomes the 50th Republican supporter of the legislation. Now, I want to tell you something about Maine. We had a friend and colleague of ours, Representative Heidi Sampson of Maine, sponsor our bill. When I say our, I mean Daily Clout. We drafted a really good election integrity bill that did a lot of things that the SAVE Act is going to do. And Representative Sampson tried to pass it, and the people who supported it and moved it forward were Republicans, and the ones who just blocked it, were Democrats. And it was very interesting when Representative Sampson told me what their questions were in the committee that was evaluating whether it was going to move out of committee. The Democrats asked about absentee ballots. And so they kind of revealed their cheating strategy, I would have thought. Because honestly, if you're not going to cheat, why not have voter ID? Why not tighten the rules around how absentee ballots are corrected? And Collins said the law is clear that in this country, only American citizens are eligible to vote in federal elections. The law says that already. The SAVE Act just stresses that people actually have to do it, right, in order to register. In addition, having people provide an ID at the polls, just as they have to do before boarding an airplane, checking into a hotel, or buying an alcoholic beverage, is a simple reform that will improve the security of our federal elections and will help give people more confidence in the votes. So Republicans control 53 seats in the Senate, so they need some Democrats to cross over. I believe Fetterman has said that he is going to cross over. The opposition to the SAVE Act from the Democrats is, again, incredibly revealing. Chuck Schumer, who represents New York, slammed the bill as, quote, Jim Crow 2.0, designed, it's so inflammatory, designed to disenfranchise Americans who don't readily have access to a birth certificate or passport. Come on. I Googled how to replace my birth certificate in New York. It's like $15. It's on a website. They send it to you through the mail. You fill out a form. Everyone who knows how to get a driver's license or, sign a rental lease or sign up for benefits is able to do that. So he argues they make it so hard to get any kind of voter ID that more than 20 million legitimate people, what does that mean? Mainly poorer people and people of color will not be able to vote under this law. Schumer said Sunday on CNN. That's just a lie. We will not let it pass in the Senate. We are fighting it tooth and nail. It's an outrageous proposal that shows the sort of political bias of the MAGA right. Well, unfortunately for Chuck Schumer, 83% of American adults, including Democrats, support, quote, requiring all voters to show government-issued photo ID to vote. So people voting by mail would have to enclose a copy of photo ID in order to vote. That seems super reasonable to me. It's crazy that I walk into a voting booth in New York and I offer to show my ID, and the Republicans are like, you can't show ID. The Democrats are like, you don't have to show ID. It doesn't make me happy. It is an existential question for the U.S., and it should be considered that. This is absolute high-stakes legislation, said the president. Pass it and we save the republic. Don't pass it and we roll the dice. I 1,000% agree with him. There's no question that as I've written, we don't know since the machines were introduced in 2005 who won any election in the United States. And the fact that there's such as I've been sharing with you guys, New York state law compels the Board of Elections to initiate a 3% hand count of the paper ballots if a citizen requests it after an election. Well, my candidate allegedly lost, Athena Clark. She was running for city council in New York. Zoran Mamdani, a Marxist Islamist, allegedly won. My candidate still hasn't received a formal letter from the Board of Elections about whether she won or lost or what the final tally was. And when we went to the Board of Elections, like the day after Election Day, to initiate that 3% paper ballot hand count, we were blocked and gaslit and stonewalled for an hour. I have it all on audio. And not a single lawyer will I've approached 4 lawyers to represent this case. No one will touch it because lawyers who have challenged the vote in New York, including President Trump's lawyer, have been disbarred in New York. So if there's nothing to hide, let me have my 3% paper ballot hand count. I think the SAVE Act is de minimis, right? It's so basic that you show ID to register to vote. Let's see. We already read that one. Thank you. So I am hoping and praying that the Republicans can get the SAVE Act through. I don't really see on the chessboard how they can. I guess I'm also calling on sane Democrats. You guys are going to eventually be completely exposed as only in power because you cheated. Like that's kind of happening in Minnesota. So I would say get ahead of this train, barreling down the tracks, and cross over to support the SAVE Act. I think people are going to be so turned off with seeing insane justifications from Democrats for not making sure that just Americans are voting, that they're going to flock to MAGA anyway in the midterms. I think it's a losing position for Democrats. If I were still a Democratic political consultant, which I used to be, then I would advise against your talking point being women are too stupid to figure this out, and Black people are too stupid, and it's better to not guarantee that one person, one vote is really how the system works. So that's the SAVE Act. And the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is Marco Rubio's brilliant, brilliant speech in Munich. And there we have it. This is the Hill. Last week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was at the Munich Security Conference in Germany, and he got a standing ovation for his remarks that were about kind of the mission of the West. And he came out of that incredibly Churchillian, historic home run speech, really kind of in the first place as a contender for the presidency for 2028. And what he did in his speech in Germany is to an audience that was in the middle of the European Union's insistence that borders are meaningless, and Spain just accepted, they said 500,000 new illegal migrants. It's actually 1.5 million. They've accepted 30 million across Europe since the year 2000. All of Europe has changed. And these migrants, as we often discuss, are not coming from cultures that are that aligned with Europe's or England's. They're coming, many of them, from sub-Saharan Africa or Afghanistan or rural Pakistan. Now, I am not a racist, but it is not racist to note that in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of countries, and Northern Africa for that matter, that are majority Muslim, infibulate and women and girls, meaning they sew their vaginas shut or they cut off their clitorises. Girls in girlhood in order to make them marriageable. That really happens. Like 98% of Somali women have not just clitoridectomy, but the whole external parts of their vaginas cut off. That is really true. Trigger warning, I guess, but you guys should know that. This is a barbaric culture. I mean, is it wrong to say it's a barbaric culture if they're maiming, sexually violating, and traumatizing almost every single girl who grows to womanhood? I don't think it's too strong to say barbaric in that case. Afghanistan, women just, you hear nothing from the UN Council on Women, but the Taliban just issued new rules that women couldn't hear each other's voices. They can't go to school. They can't look out into the street. They're living like hostages under wraps. I mean, it's like they're being held hostage in darkness their whole lives. And that's barbaric, right? Well, that's the culture that we're importing. I'm sure all these cultures have nice things about them, great food in Afghanistan, or, ancient traditions of other kinds, but these are absolutely barbaric living practices. And a lot of people are coming from rural Pakistan, where, again, Pakistan also has a very rich, deep culture. Rural Pakistan, literally, when it was colonized in the 19th century, that area, people were burning widows on sati piles when their husbands died. The English had to put a stop to it. I'm not saying white people are superior. I'm just saying that actually happened in history. The colonizers stopped that barbaric practice. I'm not saying colonization is a good thing. I'm just saying that was considered positive and normative to burn a woman to death when her husband died. Rural Pakistan is also home of child brides and honor killings, very common, and rape as punishment. A lot of these cultures, very hardcore Islamic cultures, really do believe and are taught that Western women are to be used sexually. Like there's no reason to respect them, to respect their boundaries. They're worse than prostitutes. And so now you're getting this shocking wave. Like, I'm not saying there's never been rape in Europe before, but since these cultures have come to Europe, the sexual assault, harassment of young women especially is off the charts, girls and young women. And many parents are reporting that these immigrants hang out around schoolyards. I personally think this is part of a memo to destabilize society in Western Europe, that immigrants are doing things they would not do in their home countries, brandishing swords and praying in the street, all kinds of crazy destabilizing stuff you don't see in Arab countries. But wherever it's from, it's happening. So Marco Rubio warned this audience of Europeans of, quote, civilizational erasure. And he also held open a door to invite Europe to strengthen its friendship with America. Again, we belong together, he said of the US and Europe. Quote, and so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. This is, it was a very nuanced speech. It was very diplomatic. It was an invitation, and it's coming at a critical time because right now in Germany, in the Netherlands, soon in Britain with the Reform Party, you're seeing the number one political party in France, where they tried to criminalize her running for office, Marine Le Pen. You're seeing that the most popular parties are what are called far right. They're really just sovereign nation parties, I think. They're moderate for the most part. They just want their countries back. You know, they just want their countries back. They want France to be French, Germany to be German, the Netherlands to be Dutch. And so in this kind of cauldron of EU opening the floodgates to quench Europe, basically, with these very incompatible immigrants from very radical cultures, and the rise of these populist movements that can't really get traction because their leaders keep being kind of arrested or threatened with legal action, or, you know, in some cases, a lot of the German leaders at a lower level were died suddenly, right? I mean, I'm not saying they were assassinated, but it's hard to get traction if you're, I mean, it's hard to go from the mass popular support to actually leading the country. Marine Le Pen has been trying and trying and trying. She's just, you know, lawfare is waged against her. Into this hotbed, you had Marco Rubio stepping forward with a very engaging vision of President Trump's foreign policy, which, respectfully, President Trump isn't very good at articulating himself. And you also had a very diplomatic and kind of flattering, I would say emotionally skillful approach he made. You know, unlike Vice President Vance, who, to be fair, the vice president's job is always to be the attack dog, the, you know, bad cop. He's doing his job, but Rubio really looked not just presidential, but like a leader of the free world, and a leader who could remind the West what the West is, why the West is worth defending, what are the values and treasures of the West. And he did it. I think it helps that he's of Spanish heritage and Latino heritage, you know, by descent, because it didn't sound racist. It didn't sound xenophobic. And he said, like, he's sophisticated. He said, this is not about being xenophobic. It's about cherishing what we built together, cherishing our cultures, our religion. He said Christian. Europe is Christian. Europe has been Christian since since Christianity was brought to Europe in the first centuries of the first millennium. Europe stayed Christian by pushing back, and these battles have been really forgotten, against Islam aggression. Century after century, you saw it in Spain. All of southern Spain used to be Muslim. You saw it in Turkey. You know, the conflicts between the Ottoman Empire and Europe, certainly World War I. I mean, in many, many countries that used to be Christian are now Muslim. And I have nothing against Islam as a pure religion. I have nothing against Muslims. But I think it's salutary and quite brave that Marco Rubio reminded Europe of its Christian history. because there's nothing wrong with Europe having a Christian history. And many of those countries are Christian to this day. Italy is Catholic, I mean, it just legally is. It's not there isn't a separation of church and state like we have in the United States, which I appreciate it very much in the United States, but there's nothing wrong with recognizing that, Britain has the Church of England, Ireland is Catholic, and Protestant, Germany gave birth to the Reformation. Like, this is a rich, 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 important history. And, the language of Shakespeare, the language of Dante, and Rubio was educated and eloquent enough to invoke this civilizational aspect of cherishing the West and defending the West. That's worth being proud of too. It doesn't mean it's the only great culture in the world, but just like other people, like radical Islamists, are proud of their culture, Rubio showed how you can be proud of your culture and not be a skinhead, right? If you're a European, even if you're Caucasian, even if you're Christian. I'm glad he stayed away from race, but he definitely made a non-racist case for Western civilization, for the defense of the West, and for the coherence of the West and North America as a shared heritage, a group of countries that belong together, should work together, and that share values. So that huge success. And even in the legacy media, it's being treated as a huge success. So I just want to really congratulate Marco Rubio and his speechwriter, whoever he or she is. I would be amazed if it was just Marco Rubio, because speeches don't work that way, but you never know. He or she or they did an incredible job. I say this as someone who's worked on many a vice presidential speech and been married to someone who worked on many a presidential speech. And it was a home run. And you could really see it's almost like President Trump is clearing away the wreckage and creating conditions from which to rebuild a transatlantic alliance and to rebuild our allies and to rebuild a kind of Western leadership. So it was really, really important, really beautiful, and I think it'll make a difference. I would love to see foreign policy that flows from that, and you're starting to see it. Like Vice President Vance, did say we're not going to tolerate Britain censoring people. He did speak up about that, and I would love to see things like tariffs and also opportunities tied to benchmarks of Europe maintaining its sovereignty, its history, its free speech, free association, all of its historical freedoms. So thank you for letting me share what I found so moving about that. And if anyone ever wants me to advise on that kind of foreign policy, I am right here. You know where to find me. Let me now thank our sponsors, without whose support none of these broadcasts would reach you. American Alternative Assets. If you take a drive through any major city after sunset, you'll notice something strange. Dark windows, empty offices. Right now, 1 in 5 commercial buildings in America is sitting vacant. And nearly $1 trillion in real estate loans are coming due this year. If those buildings stay empty, the banks take a hit. And those are the same banks where your retirement savings likely sits. There's a new free report called the Ghost Tower Signal that breaks it all down. It uncovers 7 early warning signs that showed up before every major crash since 1929. All 7 are active again right now. This won't make the evening news, but it could help you protect your savings from what's coming. You should download it for free at cloutgold.com. That's cloutgold.com, cloutgold.com, or call 855-803-GOLD to get your copy mailed to you. That's cloutgold.com or 855-803-GOLD. And there's more. And I want to tell you about Washington's 2-tier system of information about economics. Have you ever noticed that Washington seems to play by one set of rules and everyday Americans are stuck with another set? For decades, there's been a two-tier financial system in this country. The political class and their donors get access to the best opportunities, private deals, special investments, insider advantages. And regular Americans outside of that community, they're told to stick with the same tired investment options, earn next to nothing, and hope inflation doesn't wipe them out. That wasn't an accident, that was policy. But here's what's changed. Under President Trump, that system finally got challenged. With Executive Order 14330, President Trump opened the door for ordinary Americans to access investment opportunities that used to be reserved for the wealthy and well-connected, especially inside retirement accounts. No lobbyists, no special connections, just finally the same rules for everybody. And that matters right now because America is in the middle of a massive AI and infrastructure build out, one that President Trump has made a national priority. Not speculation, not hype, real infrastructure, real capital, real money moving. There's one AI linked income opportunity I've been following, highlighted by our sponsor, that's positioned to benefit directly from this shift without forcing you to guess which tech stock wins. If you want to see how it works and why this policy change matters, you can learn more at www.oxfordplan.com. That's www.oxfordplan.com, because for the first time in a long time, Washington didn't just talk about helping the middle class, it actually changed the rules in their favor. So you can discover Washington's two-tier system at www.oxfordplan.com. Again, that is www.oxfordplan.com. That is our sponsor. No relationship to the university, but an incredibly interesting, informative set of kind of white papers on how to protect your investment in retirement and how to make the most of this AI boom most recently. So that's it for me, you guys. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope my next broadcast, I'm feeling more cheerful about the rebuilding of Washington, D.C. and the progress of this administration, which turns out to be so like the best administration in my lifetime. I can't believe I'm saying that, but they actually are. I know some of the people on the inside, they are really working so hard day and night to deliver for you guys. I'm an independent, I'm not affiliated. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I've just been observing people leading our country for many decades. And I'm really moved by how this administration is trying to get back on the track, the path laid down by Jefferson, Washington, President Lincoln, and so on. Take care, everyone. I will see you next time. This is Naomi Wolf at Outspoken. Go to Substack and sign up for my Substack Outspoken, and please subscribe if you possibly can. It really helps. And go over to dailycloud.io, independent news, Bill Cam, which lets you follow any state or federal bill from your phone, Legisector, which is targeted to your industry. We give you these tools, but it costs money to keep them going. Please keep supporting us. Make a donation at Daily Cloud. Sign up for Bill Cam. Sign up for Legisector. Subscribe. Let's keep going, driving our democracy. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.